Hi, I'm Shawna.
And I'm Liz.
Welcome to Getting Bookish, a weekly podcast where we will talk about different book-related topics, let you know what we're reading, and even answer Q&As from you.
Be sure to visit our website, gettingbookish.com, and check us out on Facebook and Instagram at Getting Bookish. If you enjoy our podcast, we'd love for you to subscribe and leave us a rating and review, which helps us to be seen by other book lovers.
With all that said, we hope you'll enjoy Getting Bookish with us.
Enjoy the podcast.
Hello, friends, and thank you for joining us again. And I have to say that this is going to be one of my favorite podcasts. So the last Tuesday of every month, that particular podcast, which is this one, is going to be a little bit different. And in those podcasts, we are going to share with you what we have read over the past month, what we are currently reading, and then we are going to list 4 books that we're trying to decide on what we should read next. So you can kind of go along that journey with us. And we also are going to be posting a picture of the books that we mention. So please go onto our Facebook page at Getting Bookish, find those pictures, and tell us which one you think that we should read next, if you have an opinion on that. And I'll go ahead and start with the books that I finished reading for this month. I'll just give you 3 of them. The first one, well, the first 2 I don't have with me. I borrowed them, so I had to give them back. But the first one, I know, and they're so good. I'm thinking I may need to add them to my library, because nothing is worse than telling somebody about a book that you absolutely love, and they're like, "Can I borrow it?" And you're like, "I don't have it." So the first one is Brain on Fire, and that is by Shawna Can. I don't know how you pronounce that. But this is actually her story, her real true story of how she started having this mental breakdown. She thought she got bit by this bug, and right at that point, she started losing all sense of who she was, and eventually ended up in a hospital. She wasn't able to speak or feed herself or walk, and it was like her whole entire body and mental clarity was destroyed. And so all of the doctors couldn't figure out what was going on with her, and I believe this spanned like a 6-month period. Wow. And a lot of them were just saying, you know what, we either can make her comfortable, basically, or she's going to have to go to a mental hospital, and her family didn't want that. So they wanted to find out what was wrong with her and fix her. But how do you fix what you don't, when you don't know what's going on? So the way she was able to tell this story is through journals that her family kept, through talking with her friends who were with her through that whole event, and from video footage from the hospital. So she was able to piece that all together and kind of tell this story about what happened to her. And so it's pretty remarkable and terrifying, because you're like,
sounds like it.
this could literally happen to anybody at any time. So it's a really great book. The next one is The Orphan Train, and that is by Christina Baker Klein. This takes place in the kind of mid-late 1800s, when all these children who were orphaned, either their parents died or they didn't want them anymore. They were all shipped to like the Midwest to these families, and they'd basically line up these children, and families would come in and say, I'll take you. And I think they said the older boys went first, I think the babies went first, then the older boys, because they could work the farms, then the older girls, because they could watch after other children or do house chores and cook. And then last were like kind of those probably toddler type children.
Right.
And it's so sad that I'm sure some of them went to great families, but this book tells a side that is really heart-wrenching, that not all children went to families where they were treated great. Some of them were treated worse than you would treat, you know, a bug. You know, I mean, like, these poor children that have already had this horrible whatever happened to them are now in these families where they're just treated terribly. So this is a true event, but the characters are fictionalized. And then the other one, oh, I have this one. This is Salt to the Sea by Ruth Sepetys. Is that how you say it? Sepetys. And this one I actually got because of the cover. And I saw the shoes and I actually thought of the Holocaust. So I'm drawn towards books about the Holocaust and World War II. And with these shoes, that's what I think about. But it wasn't necessarily about Auschwitz or the camps that I usually read about. It actually takes place, it takes place in 1945, and it's one of the largest events where a ship sinks with the most people in it, and nobody's ever heard of it. So we've all heard of the Titanic, right?
Right.
That tragic event. But no one has heard of the Wilhelm Gustloff. And this ship carried, I think it was supposed to carry, I want to say like 1,500 people. And I believe it ended up going down with about 12,000 people.
Wow.
Yes. So this book is actually considered to be young adult, and the way that it's told is through the different characters, and so the chapters are named of the characters. And that's how they name the chapters. So there's Alfred, Amelia, Joanna, and it was a little hard in the beginning to keep track of all that, but then as you go, it's not hard at all. And this was such a wonderful book, and it is definitely on my favorites. But it was so crazy to hear about such a tragic event, such a huge event that we had never heard of. And why I think we haven't heard of it is kind of how you touched on the library book, because it took place during the same time as the Holocaust. And so when you're comparing something that happened to 12,000 people to something that happened to 6 million people, that kind of overshadows, even though they're both so tragic. But the Titanic happened in its own time period, so everybody focused on that. If this had happened, a decade sooner or a decade after, everybody would have heard of it. So I think this is a really, really great book, and it's definitely hard to get through at sometimes because it's very heavy, but I absolutely love it. So those are 3 that I have read this past month. What are yours?
Well, yours all sound fantastic. I feel like I need to write them down for my own to-be-read list now. So the last 3 books I read, will start with Good Omens. And I actually listened to this. I had bought the book, and then I just felt, I don't know. I had a hard time getting into it, but I really wanted to read it because they're making it into a TV show. And so I was excited to listen to it, and it was a fun listen. So it's called, the full title is Good Omens, The Nice and Accurate Prophecies of Agnes Nutter. And I gave this, I know, it has this great title, but it's about an angel and a demon that are working together to not bring about the apocalypse because they're enjoying their time on Earth the way it is. Mm-hmm. And so it's funny. It was just like a fun read, and coming into it already with Bible knowledge, it made the whole story just kind of funny. And so it was really fun. I'm excited to see the television show. And so that was the first previous read. And then I just reread one of my favorites, which is The Scorpio Races by Maggie Stiefvater. She is actually the author of The Raven Boys, which I usually refer to as one of my favorite series.
I think I'm going to have to read that.
Yes.
You keep talking about it. I feel like I need to read it just to see what the big deal is here.
Yes. So The Scorpio Races is really fun. It's about this kind of old legend about the Kapellishka. And the Kapellishka are these wild horses who come out of the sea.
Oh.
And so the legend exists outside of this book, but Maggie loved the idea of it, and so she wanted to write a book about this legend. And so it's really fun. It follows these two characters that are in their late teens and just this life on this tiny island where it all centers around kind of November when this big race happens. So people capture the Kapellishka and they try to tame them a little bit so that they can participate in this horse race. And
that
the excitement,
awesome.
it's really fun. And I feel like I'm not even describing how, like, it's just this great, warm, cozy book. It's a little melancholy. Mm-hmm. It kind of feels like a rainy day a little bit while you're reading it. This was actually my 6th time reading this book.
Oh,
I know.
Wow.
I know. I've read it quite a few times. So that was another one that I just finished reading.
It's so funny because you talked about the horses coming out of the water. And I had the immediate image of during the movie The Last Unicorn when all the unicorns are like flooding onto the beach. I'm like, oh, like that.
That's sweet and magical. These are more like vampire horses. But okay. Yes. These horses would also like to eat you.
Okay.
But so not as magical as The Last Unicorn, but yeah, kind of the same idea. And so then the other book I just finished is this behemoth of a book. It is like just under 1,000 pages.
Wow.
This was a huge book. It's the last book in the Throne of Glass series by Sarah J. Maas. This is Kingdom of Ash, and it's an adult fantasy series. And I'm not sure I've ever read something that was so well written. And now that I say that, I'm like, but Harry Potter is really well written. But the story over the past like 6 books, there's just so many layers. And in this last one, like everything starts coming together and like all these little things and all the storylines start to weave together. And it was just very artistically done. It was beautiful. Just the way it was written was fantastic. But this whole series is amazing if you like fantasy. And I was so excited. This was definitely like 5 stars, all the stars.
Wow.
I rate on a 5-star system, but I was like, can this get like 8 stars? Because that's how much I loved it.
That is amazing.
So those are my last 3 books that I've read. What are you reading right now?
Oh, goodness. All right. So I feel like this is how it is with anybody who is an avid reader. You probably have more than one book going at once. You're maybe reading things at different times or whatever. The next one I'm going to mention because I'm actually reading it to my children. But it is... The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. This is unabridged. I try to, as long as it's age appropriate, to read the unabridged editions. And this particular one, obviously by L. Frank Baum, this is illustrated by Robert Ingpen. And the illustrations in this are so cute. If you are listening on podcast and you want to see what we're holding up, head over to our YouTube channel at Getting Bookish, and you'll be able to see the books that we're holding up. But the pictures in here, look at that. Isn't that terrifying?
Yes.
That is one of the Wicked Witches. But the pictures in here are so great. We're going into the Emerald City. The illustrations in this, my kids are loving. This is when they're in the poppy fields. And that's when the lion is jumping over like the ravines and everything. They absolutely love this. And I have to admit, this is my first time reading it. I never read it as a child. I watched the movie. So I'm reading it as an adult to my children. I love it, but I'm noticing all of these differences. The main one being that her shoes aren't red.
Right.
Her shoes are silver. As I'm reading this book, I'm like, I wonder what happens to make them red. But they're never red. And there's a lot of parts in here, like the Tin Woodman, his story is so tragic and terrifying.
It is.
As I'm reading it, I'm like, oh, let me read this a little bit faster because this is really scary. And then we get to the part where they're chopping off the heads of wolves and twisting the necks of crows. And I'm like, oh my goodness.
This is a little more graphic than the movie.
Right? But I absolutely love it. The illustrations are great. The kids are really enjoying it. The other book I'm reading is called The Lost Girls by Heather Young. And this story is about a family who goes to this to their vacation place every summer. And one summer, one of their daughters, they have 3 daughters, 2 older ones and 1 younger. I think the older ones are like 11 and 12, and the younger one, Emily, is 6. On the last day of their vacation, Emily, the little girl, goes missing. And they never find her. They don't know what happened to her. She just goes missing. And so the way it's written is you go back and forth between generations. So you're listening to the sister tell a story as when she was like 11 or 12 years old, and she's talking about her family and her little sister Emily. And then you go to more present day to Justine, who is like, would be her grandchild. Yes, her grandchild.
Wow.
So it's like skips a generation in the book. And so Justine is now in this house with all of these memories, and she's now uncovering little things to maybe try to figure out what really happened to Emily, but nobody knows. As far as I am, nobody knows yet. But it's so sad because you see these 2 older sisters. They're closer in age. They're closer with each other. And they just shun out this little sister. Like, as soon as their mom turns around, they're like, go away. Get out of here. We don't want to play with you. And so this little girl has nobody to play with. She gets a lot of mom and dad's attention. So the older girls are kind of a little jealous of that, you know. And then what Justine finds, who is the more current day person, are these little short stories that one of the surviving sisters wrote. And she worked at a library. And so she would read the children these stories about this little girl, this little 6-year-old girl named Emily, who went on all of these adventures. And she would always go somewhere at 6, when she was 6, and she wouldn't come back. Like, she would go into a magical world at 6, and that's where she was. And it always stopped at 6. So you can tell that she's really dealing with the pain of her sister leaving, because the stories sound magical, but when you take a step back, you know, she's writing out her pain. That's how she's kind of healing, is writing these short stories about her sister in these magical worlds. So I guess in her mind, she's sending her sister to these beautiful, fun, magical worlds instead of what she may really have encountered, you know. So that is pretty sad. Do I have any fun books? Well, Wizard of Oz is fun. Okay.
They're not all sad.
The last one that I'm currently going through, and this is because I'm a homeschooling parent, is The Brave Learner by Julie Bogart. I cannot say enough about this book. I love, 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 love this book. I love Julie Bogart so much. I feel like I'm hugging her when I hug this book. I was actually really honored and excited to be on her launch party. So she had a Facebook group, and a couple of us were in this. So we got to go live with her and just hear her chat about her book. And this, it says, Finding Everyday Magic in Homeschool Learning and Life. And so she gives a lot of tips and pointers and ideas for how to teach your child and help them learn out of the box. So not just your standard sit down with your curriculum and learn this way. Her whole thing is learn the way, or teach a child the way they learn, and show them the world, and they will explore it and they will learn. So I love this book, and I highly recommend it to anybody who homeschools, but I also recommend it to anybody who has children at all, whether they're in public, private, because you can take any tips and tricks from this and just help your child grow a love of learning. So those are my current reads. What are yours?
All right. And I just started a book that I was looking at my Audible account, and I've actually owned this book in the audio version for 4 years and have not listened to it.
It's time.
But it's time. And the book is called The Novice, and it's by Taryn Matheru. And it's not a book that necessarily drew me in. The description wasn't really exciting, and the cover wasn't necessarily something I wanted to read. But I always tried, when I was working at the library, to read the books that the kids recommended to me, because I loved it when they would come up to the desk and be like, I just read this book and it was so good. You have to go read it. And so I remember there was this boy, and he was probably 14, and he was always his mom was always trying to get him to read books, and he just wasn't very interested. But he read this book, The Novice, and he really liked it. And so it's been on my list forever. And so I just started listening to it. I'm about maybe 20% of the way in. And so the story is about a boy who was left as a baby in front of it's a fantasy based book. It feels very Narnia-esque. At least so far. There's lots of goblins and things happening. But he's left as a baby in front of the wall of their city, and this man takes him in because he doesn't have any children and raises him. And pretty quickly in the book, some things happen, and he has to leave the comfort of his home. And like I said, I'm not too far into it yet, but he's just gotten to a school that will help him learn, because he has he suddenly discovered that he has the ability to summon demons, which in this story is a good thing. They're like animals who help you win wars and things. And so he's just getting to the school, and he's still kind of an outsider. And I can see while I'm reading this how much it would appeal to that younger male teen who probably doesn't like to read. It's really exciting, and the pacing is super quick. And so I can see, as I'm reading it, I'm like, okay, I can see now why he would be like, you have to read this book. So that's the one I'm listening to. And then, shockingly, I am reading a YA fantasy book. This is Blood Witch. It's the third book in the Susan Dennard trilogy. So it's, I'm trying to think, it's Truth Witch. Oh, they're on the back. That makes it easy. Truth Witch, Wind Witch, and then this one, Blood Witch. So it's a fantasy series where these characters have different powers that they call like their witch abilities. And it's pretty exciting. I'm actually pretty close to the end, if you
Oh,
can see
yeah.
where my bookmark is. And right now it feels very fractured, the story does. And I'm getting a little bit concerned that as we get to the end,
How are they going to
it's
wrap it
gonna
up?
be it's gonna like be rushed.
Yeah.
Like you have to wrap it up real quick. So I'm getting a little nervous approaching the end, but we'll see how it goes. And so I just started last night Girl Stop Apologizing by Rachel Hollis. And I was so tired last night, so I read like the first chapter and I was like, I'm probably gonna have to reread it because I'm half asleep already. But I really, it's always exciting to find someone who talks the way you hear, who presents information in a way that's just that you feel like they're talking right to you. And so that's how I feel with Rachel Hollis. So I'm really excited for her new book, but I haven't gotten far enough in to be like, this is what this book is about. But, she's always pretty hard hitting on like, don't be dumb. She says that a lot in her. Just like, believe in yourself and have the confidence to go do things. So I'm really excited to get further along in that since I just started it. And technically this last book I'm reading, although I've been like not very far into it for quite a while now because I keep putting it on the back burner for other books. And so this one is called The Hearts We Sold, and it is YA. It's contemporary, but it has some fantasy elements in that they live in a society where you can give up a part of yourself in trade for like a wish coming true.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and so like some people give up like fingers and toes to be beautiful. Yeah. It's a little, it feels like it's based on a fairy tale in kind of that's real weird way. But like, so the character in the book, she's always felt like she didn't want to participate in this because it's kind of awful. And, but she comes from like a really rough home life, and she's been accepted and she's been going to this kind of prestigious school, and she wants to continue being able to go there. It sounds like she's pretty smart because that's why she's been able to go, but they no longer can give her funding. And so she has to come up with her own funding. And I'm right at the part in the book where she's probably going to give up her heart, thus the name of the story, in order to get the money to continue to go to school. But the whole concept is really interesting. I actually got it in a book subscription box that I get. But I got it like in October. It's been a while. And even though it's really good, it hasn't been good enough for me to set other books aside to read. So hopefully I can get this one finished soon.
Now, do you think, because you're going through Girl Stop Apologizing, do you think that looking back, do you always have some kind of self-development book that you are steadily in? Is that one of the books that you're always reading in addition to your other books?
I don't think so. I love watching like TED Talks, and I like those kinds of things, but I can't say that I'm always reading something that's like a self-help. But I feel like I'm always, taking in that information. It's just not necessarily in a book.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm always in the midst of some kind of homeschooling book or how to understand your children type of book.
Just trying to maintain some sanity. I understand that.
Exactly. And now, finally, we come to what we are trying to figure out, what should we read for our next book. I have 4 choices here. So again, I'm going to put a picture of these on our Facebook page, and I want you guys to give me your opinions. The first one, and I'm looking at these again, and I'm like, these are all such heavy books. Like, I don't read anything that's light and fun. I mean, well, This is fun for me, I guess. So this first one is called Picking Cotton. Have you heard of that?
I have.
This is by, well, it says by Jennifer Thompson Canino and Ronald Cotton with Aaron Tornio. And this is a memoir of injustice and redemption. So this book is, I think this might be a little tough to get through. Something very traumatic happens to the woman in this book. I don't know the age of the ears that are listening, so I won't say exactly what. But something very traumatic happens to her, done to her by a man. And she goes to the lineup to pick out who that person is. And she says, without a doubt, this person right here. And she points to the man whose last name is Cotton. And because she identified him, he goes to jail, I believe, for 10 years. It turns out he was not the correct man. And so, from what I gather from this book, is they form a type of relationship just talking through this. And it says a memoir of injustice, which we just discussed, and redemption. So I'm interested to see how he feels towards her when she finds out she picked the wrong guy. You know, does he forgive her? Does he, hold this heavy grudge towards her? So I think that'll be really interesting to read. The next one is called Victoria by Daisy Goodwin. This one right here. So this girl, Alexandrina Victoria, she's 18 years old. Her uncle dies. So she is now the Queen of England. Just like that. She wakes up and she is an 18-year-old Queen of England. And they're thinking, how in the world can this girl be the Queen of England? So they want her to marry, some prince. And she's like, you know what? No, I don't think I need a prince. I think I can rule this country by myself. So I'm really excited. I love World War II era. I love this era. I love the Tudor era, the kings and queens. Oh, I just love it.
When I read historical fiction, that's the era I want to read.
Oh, also. Really?
Yes.
Oh, I just absolutely love it. I love the coyness of everything they do. I love that the whole hierarchy it's riddled with lies and deception, and
oh yeah.
And yet everybody knows it, but nobody admits it, or
right.
Yeah, I don't know. It's so fascinating. Like, I would love to live back in that time, but then I'm thinking, no, because they'll just behead you for no reason or whatever.
Right. As a kid, I was always like, I want to live like back in like the Renaissance.
Yes.
And then my mom would remind me that they didn't have indoor plumbing. So I probably didn't actually want to live then, but it just seems so beautiful.
Right. My third choice is called Life in a Jar. It's the Irina Sendler project. So a lot of people now know who Irina Sendler is. She is the woman during the Holocaust who smuggled out babies. And she would put them in tool bags. She would take them out and sneak them through these ghettos and give them to families who were willing to hold the children for hopefully when the parents were free. But what you don't know, and what I didn't know, and I'm fascinated by, because I have the other book, I think it's called the Irina Sendler story or something, and it's about her story. But nobody knew this woman until I think it was these three girls in Kansas. They were doing a history project, and they basically found this story, and they turned it into a play. And that's when people discovered who this woman was, through this school project that these girls did. And so if these girls hadn't like uncovered like this story, we would never know who this like amazing, heroic, wonderful woman was. So it's kind
That's
of
amazing.
right. And if you're wondering, life in a jar, it's because she would take the names of all of the children and put them in these jars and hide the jars. She would put the name of the child and their parents so that when their parents hopefully came out, she would be able to reunite them. So I'm really excited to read this. I love that it says, based on the true story of Irina Sendler, a Holocaust hero, and the Kansas teens who rescued the rescuer.
Oh, that sounds fantastic.
Yeah, this is by Jack Mayer. So I love that they uncovered that story. My last one that I'm trying to decide which one I should pick is Kristen Hanna, The Great Alone.
Ooh,
Now,
and I have not read this, but I just hear wonderful things about it constantly.
I know, I'm so excited. So this is about a family the dad was a prisoner of war in the Vietnam War. And he comes home, and I believe he is, rightfully so, has this like PTSD, this kind of, mental instability from whatever happened to him in the war. So he takes his whole family and they move to Alaska, and they think that's going to make it all better. But what it sounds like, just from reading about it and listening, is that it becomes not a great place for the mom and the daughter. I think it's just the mom and the daughter, because of what he's going through. So it sounds pretty terrifying, but I'm really excited to read that. So those are the 4 that I am trying to pick from for my next pick. What are yours?
So this was ridiculously challenging for me.
It's so hard.
I was like, 4?
Yeah.
And I realized, because of the way the screen is split, people probably can't see this, but I have this like enormous stack of books that I just got.
Oh my goodness.
And I was like, how am I supposed to choose 4? So, with much hesitation, here are the 4 books that I am considering next. The first one I know Shawna is going to vote for, because it is I'd Rather Be Reading by Anne Bogle. And so this is it's about being a reader and having a bookish life. And everyone who's read it has told me you have to sit down and read it, and it's only going to take you a couple of hours, so why haven't you read it yet? And I think it'll be super fun, and it fits in for one of my book challenge books, but it just hasn't made it to the top of the pile yet. So I guess this is the top of the pile. So there's book number 1, I'd Rather Be Reading. Next book, so these other 3 books are books that I've just gotten. The next one is The Heart Forager by Rin. I'm not sure.
Let me see it. Chupeco?
Yeah. We'll say yes. Someone tell us in the comments how you say that name. I'll look it up after this and be like, oh, obviously. So the first book is The Bone Witch. So the story is kind of, she's accidentally, quote, quote, evil, because she has these negative powers that she doesn't know what to do with or how to handle. And so the first book was amazing, and actually a local author that I know who lives here in my town, she had recommended the first one to me, and now I'm really excited to read this second one.
That looks like a huge book.
It is. It's a nice, I feel like all of these, I think that's why I'm so far behind on my...
Because your books are like 4 books in one.
They're crazy long, the ones that I am reading right now. So this next one is Dry by Neil Shusterman, and it came out just a few months ago, and it is a dystopian novel about what happens if we run out of water.
Oh.
And it's been really interesting because the reviews I've read, everyone is like, well, just make sure you have a water bottle the whole time you're reading because you're going to be so thirsty. But it sounds really amazing. The back of the book says it could go one of 2 ways. Number 1, martial law will be effective. Things will break soft and recovery will be relatively easy. Or number 2, martial law will fail. Riots will be systematic and severe, and Southern California will break bad. So, what happens now?
Oh.
And so the whole story is about what happens if the world runs out of drinking water, which sounds really exciting. And then the last one, which I'm pretty sure I've already shown you guys a couple of times in the podcast, is The Gilded Wolves.
And who's the author?
The author is Roshani Chokshi. I'm sure I am just murdering that name. Oh my goodness. But this one sounds really exciting. It's about like this team of heroes, unlikely heroes, I think, who have to go and like pull off an impossible task. So it sounds super exciting. And how could it not be with this gorgeous cover?
So pretty. That cover is so beautiful. You have to go to our Facebook page and check out the cover of this book. It's this beautiful like emerald green and dark purple plum color with this gold ornate design over it. It's beautiful. That's one that I would pick up for the cover.
Right. And I think that's part of the reason why I don't know a lot of what it's about, because that's the reason I bought it. But then I actually got a second copy of it in one of my book subscription boxes. So I think that just means that I'm going to doubly enjoy it when I get to it next. So those are the books I am reading next. And mine will also be up on Facebook for you guys to go and vote and let us know what you think should be the book that we read next.
See you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed hanging out with us. Don't forget to check us out on social media and subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss out on any of the fun. See you next week.